Hi, this is Lori, and I'm going to teach you how to make a pussy hat. This is a pussy hat. It's a hat that's very easy and simple to make. It's just a basic square that you fold in half and sew a seam. And when you put it on your head, the nature of the way you knit it stretches it out so the little seams make little ears. So it's like a little cat, you know, cat, pussy hat, get it? Okay, so that's the hat. So all you need is some pink yarn and some needles. And you can use anything. I used some stuff that was just in my stash. I have no idea what it was. But you can use things like this, which you can get at any like Walmart or Fred Meyer or, you know, Joanne Fabric or any kind of store. And they're usually like $2, you know, $1.99. And you could probably make like 4 hats out of these things. Or you can get some really fancy stuff, but, you know, we won't do that. And you can get any kind of needles. You can get some cheap metal things, you know, from Joann's or Michael's or grocery stores, or even Goodwill. Goodwill is a good place to get these cheapy kinds. Or you can get, they come in plastic, or they come in cute little things. You can get lots of different kind of needles. I'm just going to use these. These are size 10.5, which is a little bit bigger for a worsted weight, but I want to do that on purpose so I could show you the stitches and how it looks. So as long as you get the right size yarn for the right needles, that's cool. It doesn't even matter, really, what you get. So the first thing you want to do, though, is get your tape measure and measure your head, where your hat's going to be, like around your ears kind of a thing, because that's where people put their hats, you know, around to their ears, and measure how big your head is. So I got a big old head. It's about 22.5 inches. Big, fat head. So what you need to do first is start knitting a swatch, which is a way of getting you to realize how many stitches per inch that you're knitting with the yarn that you're using and the needles that you're using. So if you are using bigger needles and bigger yarn, you'll have smaller number of stitches. You use smaller needles and smaller yarn, you'll have more stitches because they're smaller, you know. So, because if you cast on like 150 stitches, your hat will be this big, you know, so you need to know how many stitches per inch you're casting on. Okay, so then in the next scene, we'll show you how to cast on. There's literally dozens of ways of casting on. But the first thing you need to do is get the yarn onto the needle. And to do that, you make what's called a slip knot. So a slip knot is literally a knot that you can make in your yarn that you can slip it and it disappears. So let's get it, slip knot, because there's no knots in knitting. So to make a slip knot, okay, I'm going to totally exaggerate. This is the tail end of the yarn. This is the working end because it's still attached to the ball. So you're going to make a loop in your yarn with the working yarn on top, right? Then you're going to bend that, hold on to it like that, and grab through the hole to the working yarn, and that makes the knot. See? And then you can move, you know, adjust your knot by just pulling on the working yarn. Does that make sense? You can rewind, you know, stop, rewind, do it again if that doesn't make any sense. So now you've got your little loop. Take your needle, put your needle through the loop, and then cinch it up with both ends so that it's tight enough so that it won't move if you do this, but you can still move it if you pull on it a little bit. So that's your, this is your very first stitch. That's the number 1 stitch, and it's a slip knot that's on your needle. Now you have to get stitches onto the needle. Now there's a billion ways to do this. Some people just take their thumb, wrap the yarn around like that, and stick the needle through. Boom, there's a stitch. The catch with this kind of cast on, once you've cast on a whole bunch of stitches, you know, blah, 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 it's really fast, then you start knitting with that, and the first thing that happens once you start knitting is you get this. It pulls. And you've got all this crap that you don't want, and then, it, you know, it bulges, and you're like, oh, I do this, and you're stuck with that. So it's kind of a pain. But you know what? If you want to do it that way and you don't mind the little bulge like that, then go go for it. It's faster, it's easier. You just wrap it around your thumb so that it crosses over, and then you stick the needle in like that. And that, oops. Stick the needle in like that, and see how it's twisted a little bit, and that makes a stitch, right? It's just, be forewarned, it's very loose and could mess things up. So what I like to do is the closest approximation to knitting, and it's a knitted cast on. So what you're doing when you're knitting into the front of the stitch. Okay, so now we've got our slip knot on the needle, and this is a knitted cast on. Instead of the wrapping with your thumb, this is knitted. So here's the stitch. So you've got the front of the stitch and the back of the stitch. The back of the stitch is away from you, front of the stitch is towards you. So what you want to do is make sure there's a little bit of room. If it's too tight, which is what happens with new knitters, you get, you got the death grip and you can't get the stitch in there. So just, you know, just loosen it up. Be loose, relax, have a glass of wine, you know. So you're gonna take the stitch and you're gonna move it from left to right. Is kind of the movement that happens, like that. And you're gonna go through the stitch from front to back, right? And you want your needle to have this kind of crossed X, T, whatever letter you want, kind of look to it, right? And once you, if you need to, you could pull, you know, that's the whole point of having the slip knot being loose. You can pull it as loose as you want it to be, right? Get it through there, and then cinch it up. Then you, then you make it tight. Once you get it in there, then you can make it tight, right? Still not too tight, but anyways. So the yarn, you're holding the yarn in the back away from you, right? This is the knitted way, it's the away from you, not towards the front and back of you, right? So you're gonna hold it in the back, and you're gonna wrap the yarn around this back needle. So this is going to be the new stitch. This is the old stitch. This is going to be the new stitch. So here comes the tricky part. So you're holding on. So somehow you've got to get, this is, yeah, so somehow you've got to hold on to the yarn and hold on to the needle at the same time. Some people will do this, wrap it around your finger like that, or go like this, or somehow, you know, hold it so that you're holding onto the yarn and the needle at the same time. Or some people just kind of figure it out. Do what works best for you, whatever feels good. This is what feels good to me, is I bring it back, wrap it around, and then you're going to use this needle to kind of do this kind of a motion. This needle is bringing the yarn underneath this stitch. And pulling another loop. So you pull that loop, then you let go. As soon as you get it underneath, you let go, pull the loop towards you, and then you put it on the other needle. This is a much more secure loop. It's not going to have that gap like you did with the E-wrap with your thumb. It's going to stay there. So now you can still keep it a little exaggerated. You put your needle underneath that loop, then tighten it up. And then you do it again. You wrap it around, hold that needle still while you're still holding the yarn. You got to kind of fidget with it. Keep your fingers up here so that it doesn't fall off, and pull it underneath. See, I screwed it up myself because I'm not doing it like I do. This is the way I do it. Wrap it around, pull it underneath. See, I'm using my finger to kind of hold on to that and pull it through. Put it on the needle. Don't loosen, leave it loose a little bit, stick the needle through, tighten it up, wrap it around, use this finger to hold as you pull it through, pull towards you, and then put it on. So you just keep doing that a million more times. When you get good at it, this is what it looks like. This is my hold music. La, da, 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 put the stitch on, in, and they have little sayings for it. In through the front door, once around the back, peek through the window, and off jumps Jack, or something like that. I don't know. dumb thing I learned from Girl Scouts. Anyway, so you keep doing this, and you keep adding more and more stitches. So remember when I showed you the tape measure? You measured your head. We're going to figure out how many stitches you're going to need. You're going to need that number. So if your head is 21 inches or 22 inches, you're going to multiply that number by how many stitches you put on the needle by your gauge. And we're going to do that in a second. Okay, so I cast on just about 20 stitches, just as a, just to show you what this, as an example, right? So you've cast on your 20 stitches just to make a little gauge, 20 or 30 stitches, however many, at least 20. 30 or 40 would be good, but at least 20 stitches would be. So you've got your first stitch. So instead of making a loop, instead of casting it on, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to go through, wrap the yarn around, pull underneath. Now this time, instead of pulling it off towards you, you're just going to pull this, and this is the stitch. This stitch comes off. But since you've wrapped the yarn around, now it's attached to that, so it's just going to come off. Boop. And see, it's still attached, right? So do it again. You go in from left to right, underneath, make a little X shape, then pull it. Just give it a little tug. You don't have to, you don't have to pull it a lot. Just the act of reaching the yarn around is enough to make that snug. Then you wrap it around, pull underneath, push it through a little bit so it doesn't fall off, and boop, pull that one off. So in, around, underneath, and off. In, around, pull underneath, and off. So just do that 6 million more times, and then keep knitting until you have, an inch or two of knitting that's done, right? It'll start building and building and building, and then once you get something that looks like this, that's like that would be what a swatch looks like, right? It's just a square of stuff. Well, you don't have to. It's gonna look like something that you could see the stitches, right? So when you do that, once you start knitting, the knitting that you'll create, once you get all the way across, this is just the knitting part. If you wanted to knit a hat that's just knitted and not knitted and purled, that will make one kind of fabric, right? But if you want it to look purled, knitted, so like this is knit on one side and purl on the other. So it's got little bumps. Can you see the little bumps? See how this has little bumpy things? And then on this side, it looks like little V's. See the V there? So this is the knit side, that's the purl side. So if you wanted to purl, you would do it completely different. So instead of going in this way to knit, you would come from the back to the front. I know this is kind of weird, but trust me, it works. Now the yarn is in the front and not in the back. So in the front. So technically, this is a backwards knit. Well, let's not think about that. Anyway, so you go from the back to the front, and then you're going to do the same thing. You're going to wrap the yarn around, but this time you're going to push it away from you. Oops. Wrap the yarn around and push it. Use your thumb to hold on to it. Push it away and pull it off. Go from back to front. Wrap around. Push it away and off. And you just keep doing that 6 million more times. And then once you get a good bunches of stitches, you knit for like an inch or two, you'll see your fabric start to grow. Then the next thing you're going to want to do is to count your stitches. Okay, now that you've knitted your little swatch, and you've got knit on one side and purls on the other side, and you've knit for a couple of inches, and you can see kind of a a little batch of stitches that you can count, you're going to take your ruler. This is a fancy ruler that I got from Knit Picks. You don't have to use this, but this is what I use. And it's got, you know, 1 inch, 2 inch, 3 inch, whatever, some kind of ruler that you can find. And you're going to look at your stitches and make sure they're kind of, you know, you kind of stretch it out a little bit so they're nice and even. And you're going to put the ruler up against your stitches. Now find the beginning of one of these V's and put the edge of the ruler against one of those V's, and then you count how many little V's are in 1 inch of the ruler. So on this little swatch we did, I have 1 V, 2 V, 3 V, 4 V's, and maybe scooch a little more, you know, that's kind of sticking in there, but we can kind of cheat. So we can basically say I have 4 stitches per inch based on using the needles that I used and this type of yarn that I used, 4 stitches per inch. And if my head is 22 stitches around and I have 4 stitches per inch, how many stitches do I cast on? How many, class? How many is that? What's
24 times 4?
22.
22 times 4, that's 88.
88 stitches. Yay, class, you get an A. So that means we're going to cast on 88 stitches. Now if you want to just, you know, err on the side of caution, just bump it up to 90, you know. That's a nice even number. It'll work. So you cast on your 90 stitches and you work back and forth doing your knit on one side and purl on the other side. And then you can do some ribbing. So why don't I show you how to do ribbing next. Okay, so the last thing we did was to talk about the ribbing. And so what I did was on my hat was I knit 2 and purl 2, knit 2, purl 2, knit 2, purl 2, all the way across. And what that does is it gives you a nice stretchy band to hold it to your head. And then when you transition to knitting on one side and purl on the other side, it creates the little pointy thing for the hat. So to do ribbing, you would do knit 2, excuse me, I did knit 2, purl 2. You can do knit 1, purl 1, it's up to you, it's totally a personal preference. I like knit 2, purl 2 because it's a little more grabby. So that's just me. So to do the knit 2, purl 2, you're going to knit 2 stitches, and now your yarn is in the back, and you want to purl. So how do you get the yarn from the front to the back? Well, you just bring it through the needles, just like that. And now your yarn's in the front. So then instead of knitting, you're now going to put the needle from the back to the front. And you're going to purl, push it away, back to the front, push it away, and now you've purled 2. Now how do you get it back? Bring the yarn to the back, just between the 2 needles. Now you're ready to knit. Knit 2, bring the yarn to the front, purl 2. And you just keep doing that, back and forth. Knit 2, purl 2, knit 2, purl 2, or knit 1, purl 1, either way, and it just keeps going. Now that's the end of that, and I'm gonna tell you some more stuff. Okay, so now that you've knit a bunch of stuff, you've knit a couple of inches of ribbing, and then you knit twice as much of the knit on the front, purl on the back, which is what gives you the shape for the pussy hat. Then you stop knitting. And when you stop knitting, then what do? You got to get the stitches off. So you're going to have to cast off. You know, in the beginning you cast on, now you're going to cast off. So I've already cast off a bunch. I'm cheating, just to be quick. So what you're going to do is you're going to always have 1 stitch on this side of the needle and then the rest of the stitches on this needle. So when you have 1 stitch on this needle, you're going to knit 1 stitch. Now you have 2 stitches on the right hand needle. You're going to take this left hand needle and go into the front of the first stitch. If that makes sense. This was the if this is the first stitch, that's the second stitch. So you go into the front of the first stitch and you're going to pull it over the second stitch. And it disappears. And now you have 1 stitch again. So that was pretty tricky. Let's do it again. Let's do it in real slow-mo. So you knit 1 stitch. Now you have 2 stitches on the needle. You're going to go into the front and pull on it a little bit. Not, death grip, but just pull on it a little bit. And you've got to bring the stitches down to the tip. And you got to be careful not to let this stitch fall off. So just hold on to it. Hold on to it with your fingers as you pull over and pull off. And then let go. See? And you just keep doing that all the way. You got 2 stitches, pull 1 stitch over, pull off, 2 stitches, pull 1 stitch over, and pull off. And huzzah! Now you have cast off all of your stitches. Then you take your scissors and you're going to want to cut the yarn. So we're going to fold it in half and we're going to sew a seam across the top of the hat. So you're going to want to have, before you cut it, make sure you have enough yarn to make it across. So you're going to want to have at least 3 times the length of the whatever it is that you're casting off, and a little extra, and you just cut. Come on. Cheap plastic stuff. So you cut it, and now you've got this nice long thing, and then you take the loop, and you just pull. There we go. And now that's nice and secure. Okay. Next thing we'll do is sewing the seam. Okay, so now you've cast off all your stitches, and hopefully you've made this lovely little bunch of V's across the top, which will be helpful when you're seaming the top of your hat. So what we're going to do is we're going to go from inside out. So this is the outside with the V's, and this is the inside with the little bumps. You're going to fold, and you've got a nice long tail, right? And you fold it in half, and we're going to sew across the top. So you take your end of your yarn, and you've got a tapestry needle. A tapestry needle is much thicker than your average just sewing needle. It has a nice big eye to hold the weight of a big foofy yarn thing. So you're going to thread your tapestry needle with the yarn. All right, there you go. Just like you do when you're just sewing something. Then you're going to line up the little V's. See the little V's along the edge here? Line up the little V's a little bit, edge to edge. And you're just going to sew through the little V's. So just pick up 2 legs of the V and go through. Oops, that's the tail. And then there you go. Cinch it up a little bit. Go through another 2 legs of the little V, and then find the other 2 legs of the V on this side. So you've got 2 V's together. Pull it through. And don't pull it too tight, because then it'll get all crunched up. So just enough. Give it some, move it around, let it breathe, kind of a thing. Then you find the other V on this side. Go through that V. And where's the V on this side? Oh, then go through that V on this side. We've got 2 V's together. Pull it through. So you just keep going under the little V legs, back and forth, till you sew up the whole side. And then you could do that on this side too. See how these are even bigger V's? See the little V's? So, you sew all the way across to the end, and then you're done. And then you got to thread, get a whole, get your ball of yarn again, and just makes another you know, this one won't be attached this time, so you just cut off a nice long piece, and then you sew up the side, this side, and you go through the V's. See the little V's, how they line up nice and perfectly, little V's like that, right? And then once you're done, it'll be all sewn together, and you do it inside out, and that'll be your pussy hat. Oh, the other thing is when you get to the end, oh shoot, I turned it inside out. Okay, so when you get to the end and you're like, oh, now what do I do? When you've sewn all the way across, you do what's called weaving in the ends. So weaving in the ends, so you'll be facing the bumpy side. So you take your you take your yarn. So let's pretend you're at the end. You're gonna go through a little bump, maybe go down to another little bump. All right, so you cinch it up, then you maybe skip a bump, go up through this bump, go up to another bump, and you just weave it back and forth. And you don't have to, sometimes I like to do it, you know, 2 row at a time. You can just, if you want to do it on the same row, just find a bump, go through one bump, skip that bump, go through this bump, and just go along one edge. That's fine. But I like to skip a bump, go down, and go to that bump, just because, you know, you don't want it to come out. It's a hat. It's going to be moving around your head. And you want to weave it for about an inch or so, about an inch worth of weaving back and forth, and then you cut it off, and then you're done. And then you can flip it inside out, and there you go. The end. That's a pussy hat. Okay, so once you've figured out how to knit on one side and purl on the other side, here's another trick that will make it easier for when you're finished, to sew up a seam. So every time you start a row, what you want is to slip the first stitch. Don't knit it like I showed you before, but just slip it, you know, without knitting it at all. And, just slip it and then continue to knit. That way it'll make the little V's on the edge of the knitting, so that when you go to make a side, when you're trying to sew up the seam on the side, you'll have little V's on both sides of the knitting that you could just put your tapestry needle under, and it makes it easier to knit. Now once you get on the purl side, so that's how you do it on the knit side. When you get to the end and you're on the purl side, you're going to do the same thing. Get to the end here. Okay, so you get to the end, you turn it around to purl. You're just going to have, this time you're going to have the yarn in front, and you just slip it instead of purling it. Cinch it up and just start purling. It's as easy as that. And it's only the first stitch that you do the slip stuff to. And it makes the lovely little V's. I don't know if you can see that. It makes the nice little V's so that you can stick your tapestry needle through the little V legs. And that's it. That's that little tip. The end.